The BCS may be, sorry Oregon, a lame duck formula, but there's always an annual quack-up, and here is this year's.
Yeldon, 30, 25, make a man miss. Right, he's gonna go! Touchdown!
Barner at the 20, cuts it outside right at the 15, to the 10, to the 5, and he goes in the end zone. Touchdown, Oregon!
Each of the 4 top-ranked teams is 9-0.
Teo's on the quarterback, sacks him on the 25.
He's at the 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown for Colin Klein!
Each 9-0, with realistic prospects of finishing the season perfect. Cue the computers and poll controversy.
If you told me that Alabama and Oregon were also undefeated, as well as Notre Dame, I'd say, well, there's a chance. There's a chance. Those are teams that have been here and done that. Notre Dame hadn't done it in a while, and those teams are undefeated too. I'd say, well, there's a chance we might get left out.
Bama, defending champion, resilient once again. Oregon at another offensive level from all others. Kansas State with a leading Heisman contender. And the renaissance of the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. Today outside the lines, the prospect of a gaggle of perfect teams at BCS title time.
And now, reporting for Outside the Lines, Bob Lee.
11 weeks into the college football season, we have 6 undefeated FBS teams. And, gee, we haven't had that in, that would be 3 years, 2009. Same situation, but here are the top 4 teams, each undefeated, each plausibly on their way to finishing perfect. And, yes, a nod to the good folks at Louisville and to Buckeye Nation waiting for their get-out-of-jail card. But the Crimson Tide and K-State and the Ducks and the Irish may present the BCS 2 years from its pending retirement with its most vexing case yet.
AJ gets the snap, pressure, screen, Yeldon, 30, 25, make a man miss. That's right, he's gonna go! Yes! He's gonna go! Touchdown! TJ Yeldon on a screen, 28 yards. No flags. Alabama in what could be one of the epic comebacks in Crimson Tide history takes a 20-17 lead with the extra point to come. 51 seconds remaining in the ball game.
We got a really good opponent this week, so it's going to be really important that our players sort of put that game behind them, as emotional as it may have been. And as I said afterwards, you know, games like this can either bring out the best in you or the worst in you, and it's all your choice in terms of how you view the future and what you need to do relative to the challenges that the next team presents.
Klein keeps it, and Klein is going to be thrown down. Klein has carried the ball 14 times here tonight. Elkins makes the stop on him. So he's thrown 19 passes, and he's run 14 times from scrimmage. So the one thing that you wonder about with him, and I see him kind of holding that right hand in the wrist area there, is really the punishment he takes with all the carries he has during the course of a game and a season.
My interest in our players, you know, is beyond football, and I always want to do the right thing for young people in our program. I think any coach in the country, you know, would feel exactly the same way. I don't want to put any young person in any undue jeopardy whatsoever. Would I expect him to play? As I said, I certainly hope that's the case, and I would expect that to take place.
3rd down and 5, Ducks at the 27 of the Trojans. And here's the call. And it is a run by Barner. Barner at the 20, cuts it outside right at the 15, to the 10, to the 5, and he goes in the end zone. Touchdown, Oregon.
Going forward, you guys, you know, have 3 games left. Do you feel like you're obviously control your own destiny? You worry about the BCS standings at all?
You don't worry about that. You take it a day at a time, a game at a time, and that's what this team does, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Dolson, head down drive. Looks like he's in. Touchdown. Notre Dame somehow, some way, finds a way to win again, another overtime victory.
If you told me that Alabama and Oregon were also undefeated, as well as Notre Dame, I'd say, well, there's a chance. There's a chance. Those are teams that have been here and done that. Notre Dame hadn't done it in a while, and those teams are undefeated too. I'd say, well, there's a chance we might get left out. The way the BCS is set up right now, If you have more than 2 undefeated teams, you can't control it. Now, in 2 years, when you have 4 teams that can play, yeah, now you can control things a little bit more, and you may be talking more about your teams, but you can't now. Maybe in 2 years, you'll find me talking a lot more about it.
That will be then. This is now. The weekend ahead is not likely to give any clarity to this picture. Alabama, a 13.5-point favorite against Texas A&M. Notre Dame favored by 18.5 on the road against BC. Oregon, a 28.5-point favorite at California. Kansas State's game with TCU is off the board because of the intrigue around Colin Klein's injury. Intrigue. We've got 4 guys to cut through the fog of all of this. And if it happens in SEC country, Paul Feinbaum is on it on the Paul Feinbaum Radio Network and Sirius XM Radio. In Manhattan, Kansas, Joshua Kinder is sports editor of the Manhattan Mercury, and that could be the neatest name of any publication we've had join us here on OTL. In Portland, Adam Jude covers the Oregon Ducks for the Oregonian, and Brian Hamlin is on the Notre Dame beat for the Chicago Tribune. And gentlemen all, thank you for being here. Josh, let's start Manhattan, Kansas, and getting injury information out of Wildcat Nation here. I know it's kind of like getting the launch codes out of Strategic Air Command. But what do we know? We know that he was Colin Klein gesturing to the hand and to the wrist. We also know they apparently took his helmet away. So what do we think the injury is, concussion or not, and will he play?
I don't think it's the wrist at all. I don't think it's the hand. You know, after he came up holding that wrist, you know, he threw 3 more passes and looked pretty good. You know, we're thinking it's a concussion. Obviously, Coach Snyder's not going to be telling us that information. But they took the helmet away. You know, I think he'll play. I think he'll play on Saturday. You know, we don't know the degree of that concussion, if it was. But I have a feeling he's going to be playing this Saturday.
How diminished is this team if he does not play? And TCU is capable of some big things, if not showing a lot this year. In the past, they've done it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously things do change with Daniel Sams at quarterback. You know, but in the time he's been given this year, he's shown that he's very capable of making this offense go. Now it does change a little bit. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You can't take Colin Klein, you know, out of the equation and expect the same from a redshirt freshman quarterback. But you know, he has the capability to run the ball. He's very athletic. He knows the system, I think, better than people think he does. He's got a little bit of freedom with it. And the other night, you know, he came in, he threw the ball very effectively.
Adam Jude, question for you. Did Oregon just score again a moment ago against USC? Has it finally ended?
I think so. There's no slowing down these guys. It's mighty impressive this year.
You've got a stat I saw in your column, 1 point every 21.9 seconds in their 9 touchdown drives against the Trojans, and points per second is a statistic in the Chip Kelly era?
Yeah, basically, yeah. You sort of throw out all the traditional stats for football, and you have to sort of convert them to basketball stats sometimes, just the way this offense operates. And for them to do what they did, to go down to USC, you know, I thought they had a good chance to win, but in no way did I think they'd be able to put up 62 points against a USC defense that you know, is usually very formidable.
We'll talk about the game at Cal coming up, but Brian, let me ask you, with the thinking with the Irish, and we heard Brian Kelly talk about the real politic view of the world that, hey, we the Irish may get left out of this. Is there palpably a sense there that they're playing with house money, being at 9-0 right now?
Well, I think that before the season you could make a pretty reasonable argument that all they needed was some sort of positive trajectory here. I mean, you looked at losing a skill player like Michael Floyd. You had tons of questions at quarterback. You had questions pretty much all over on both sides of the ball. The secondary was a mess before the season even started. You could have plausibly made an argument that an 8 or 9 win season was a terrific job by Brian Kelly and his staff. They're 9-0 already, but I do think that these are Notre Dame fans. They're like any other fans at a major college program. When they get a taste of it, they want more. So these guys, they're aiming for 12-0. The fan base is aiming for 12-0, and you know, they don't seem to want to settle for anything less at this point. I don't think they feel terrific about it, knowing what could happen now.
Yeah, certainly in the mix. Okay, Paul, here we've got the Crimson Tide closing with 3 home games before they have the SEC title game. Is the real thinking here, the real sense in Crimson Tide Nation that, gee, the other BCS berth is just a problem for the mere mortals?
I think so, and I think they're glad Notre Dame may not be a big part of this factor, because being in my 50s and other Alabama fans my age, they remember Notre Dame snatching a few national titles away from Bear Bryant in the 60s and the 70s. But I think Alabama fans really feel like they faced their toughest opponent of the year, with all due respect to Oregon, getting out of Death Valley Saturday night.
Even in the SEC title game, if it turns out to be Georgia.
I think there's some concern, but Bob, LSU and Alabama have this thing going, as I'm sure you and your viewers know, and I think that they really feel like that was the toughest game. Georgia's good, but Alabama fans remember Georgia losing 35-7 to South Carolina about a month ago.
Yeah, winning at night in Baton Rouge, from one of the toughest things to do in sport. All right, Josh, you heard Brian Kelly talk about teams that have been there before, and Kansas State doesn't slip off the tongue as easily when you talk about BCS heritage. To what extent is there concern in Manhattan that rep history is going to matter at some point, perhaps in some of the human components here of the BCS formulation?
I don't know that. I mean, they're not one of those blue blood programs, that we're also talking about today. But, what they're doing, people here, I think, are happy to be 9-0. I don't know that everyone here thought they could do that. But now that you look at the BCS, I mean, there's a legitimate chance K-State could end up in that #2 spot and stay there. But they're going to need some help along the way. It's a case of looking at those computer polls, and they take one-third of the total BCS, and then the 2/3 element with the humans, and right now they're sitting behind Oregon still. So there's got to be some ground made up, possibly on that side, or Oregon has to make up that ground on the computer side.
Exactly, but Oregon, Adam, thinking of a lot of folks looking at this, the closing kick of their schedule, if they can master it, will put them over the hump.
Yeah, absolutely, and the BCS experts I've talked to feel that same way, and I think the best thing Oregon has going for it, besides its electric offense, is that Pac-12 championship game, which the Ducks are in line to host at the end of the month now, and that will likely be over a ranked team from the Pac-12 South, and it's one more chance for the Ducks to really impress the voters and give themselves a boost in the computers.
What is the sense there, though? It's the title game. How much are they looking around? Everyone says we're just concentrating on their own business, but they're all just human. So to what extent are they watching TCU above them like that?
Sure. I mean, if you listen to Oregon coaches and players, they say they're isolated. They're focused on Cal this week, and they've had the same message for the past month that they're going to worry about the BCS standings in December. But Oregon fans are wary and nervous, and rightfully so, in the BCS. Look what happened to Oregon in 2001. They were #2 in the polls, but they didn't get a shot in the BCS National Championship game. Nebraska got that shot against Miami, and Joey Harrington and the Ducks were relegated to the Fiesta Bowl. So there's a history here with Oregon, and I think Oregon fans are a little nervous.
Isn't there a little bit of history going down to Cal? They've had their problems running up those big numbers when they make that trip.
Absolutely. 2 years ago, on their way to the BCS championship game against Auburn, Oregon squeaked out a 15-13 win thanks to a punt return. It was one of the worst offensive performances of the Chip Kelly era here, and the Ducks are obviously confident now coming off this 62-point performance, and I think Cal is going to be without their starting quarterback and their star receiver, Keenan Allen, it sounds like. So I wouldn't expect the Ducks to have much trouble down there in Berkeley this week.
We've got up the Football Outsiders calculation, the likelihood of remaining undefeated. Kansas State leads the parade at 74.5%. Notre Dame second at 71%. Alabama at 58%. Oregon in the fourth hole. There's Ohio State and Louisville along for the ride. Brian, what moment in this Irish season to you sort of stamped it as these guys are for real? There's some luck involved, yeah, but they have what it takes to maybe be there in January.
Yeah, I think it had to be the Oklahoma game. I think before that, you thought this was a pretty rugged schedule. It's turned out to be a pretty rugged schedule. I mean, you look at opponents' winning percentage so far, I think those teams have won about 63% of the games, puts the Irish in the top 20 in terms of opponents' winning percentage this year. But I think we all know the Big Ten hasn't been what the Big Ten was supposed to be. That hurts Notre Dame. But when you go to Oklahoma, when you get a good road win, I know they pulled away late, but regardless of whether you, I think, won by 1 or whether you won by 10 or 20 in that game, that had to be your signature victory. That had to be your signature moment to say, we are for real. We can beat pretty much any team on any given basis. I mean, you can make your arguments about whether Oklahoma is a bit of a paper tiger this year, and there's some validity to that, but you can't be a pretender and go into Norman and put together the kind of game that the Irish did and come out with a victory. So that was the moment. Now you go to Pittsburgh and you start thinking missed field goals from 33 yards out in the second overtime, and you start throwing your hands in the air and say, yeah, there's something else in the air with this one too. But, you know, the Oklahoma game is really when they sort of cinch themselves as guys that belong in the conversation.
But, Brian, we've heard Brian Kelly say, as he said before earlier in the show, it may not be us because these other teams will be undefeated. How widespread is that thinking, or is that pocket of, wait a minute, we could run the table here and we'll be thumping the table angrily if we're shut out?
Oh, there will be much angry thumping if they get shut out. There's no question about it from Notre Dame fans. There'll be some sprained wrists and some bruised fists at that point. Yeah, they look at who they've played. They think they've played, and they point to that statistic jumping up and down that they've played the toughest schedule of those 4 teams. Now, obviously, you can make arguments about beating LSU on the road might be the best victory that any of these 4 teams have when you talk about Alabama, but they look at that schedule and say, we have played the toughest teams that anybody else has played so far. Why are we 4th? Why aren't we up higher? You know, I mean, obviously they're not a perfect team. If they had a much more efficient offense, I think they'd look a whole lot better to voters and people from the outside. They've got a real nice defense, maybe a special defense, but the offense has had its problems, has had its inconsistencies last week against Pittsburgh. So that imperfection, I think, is keeping them sort of below the other 3 teams perception-wise. But again, they will be angry, the Notre Dame faithful, because they think they've had the toughest road so far, and it's not going to get a whole lot easier when you look at USC at the end of the year.
Anyway. Spirit and passion always. You know, Paul, we've been down this road a little bit, and of course, far be it for any season to get very close to Thanksgiving without us getting a pitchfork and storming the castle of the BCS, and we got to get it out of our system. It's this year and next year. But back in 2009, you had Auburn finish the regular season and get through the run the table undefeated, yet because they had started so far back, unable to make up ground in USC and Oklahoma, they were the ones going. So you had a front row seat of a school very frustrated back just 3 years ago.
Yeah, and here they are today, Bob, really probably 2 weeks away from firing the coach who beat Chip Kelly in the national championship game. I'm not sure I've ever seen a fall from grace like that. But I want to say something about what Brian's talking about in relation to Notre Dame. Notre Dame fans have a right to be angry, but they should be angry at their administration. They could have been in the Big Ten. They could have been in the ACC. They could have been in the Big 12. And I think that's going to cost them in the end. They played a great schedule back in August, but a lot of the schools on their schedule have fallen by the wayside, and they have nothing to play for in terms of a conference championship game. And I think they only have themselves to blame.
Well, you talk about second-guessing, Brian, Ohio State, and there you are in Chicago in Big Ten country. They could have self-imposed a ban and might have had Ohio State a pretty good chance of being eligible in here. And some of the calculations have them perhaps 5th in a poll if they were eligible this year, and they chose to play the Gator Bowl last year.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of has a lot of people in Chicago who are Ohio State fans completely baffled, because they would have had a shot at making a run at this. And kind of going back to Paul's point, yeah, Notre Dame does not have that last chance in that first week of December to kind of make another impression. I mean, they've got to make up some serious ground in perception over the next 3 weeks. I mean, they cannot be as inefficient as they were on offense against Pittsburgh, against Boston College, against Wake Forest. They need to pretty much wipe those teams off the board. They might need to win impressively against USC. And in the end, that still might not matter because, like Paul said, they don't have that championship game at the end. Now, they will never have that championship game at the end until things dramatically change in the college football landscape, because they're just going to load up their schedule as best they can and stay independent. That's not going to change. But they do have that gaping hole at the end where some teams are going to be able to make some pretty strong last impressions in December. The Irish are just going to have to go to USC, see what they do there, and let that be the last statement.
Well, as these teams jockey, each 9-0, like to swing around through the paddle and see. Let's start with Josh. What's the biggest question mark about this Kansas State team we really haven't seen tested or tested to the max so far this year?
Well, I think right now it's got to be Colin Klein, and whether or not he plays Saturday. If they can't go with him, things do change for this offense. They'll do what they normally do. They'll stick to their philosophies, but it does change. It's kind of maybe a little condensed system. So, and with TCU, they're a very good defensive team. Mm-hmm. They lead the Big 12 in rush defense. So if you can't have Klein, that can change everything this weekend for Kansas State.
And the biggest question, Adam, for the Ducks that we haven't seen tested yet.
Well, certainly the national perception about Oregon the past few years is that they don't have a defense to match that offense, and those questions came up again this weekend after the Ducks allowed 51 points against USC down there. There'd been a lot of talk this week about defensive coordinator Nick Aliotti and this defense being the best they've ever had here. And I still think that can ring true a little bit. They still got 4 games to prove themselves, and they're not going to face another opponent that has Matt Barkley and Marquise Lee to run wild. So obviously that's the one question mark about the Ducks. We've seen what that offense can do consistently, and it's just they're going to have to get it done on defense, and that's one big question mark I think for everyone.
Well, they'll have properly inflated footballs at least going forward, we think, if they're not playing USC. Brian, we've seen the Irish live on the knife's edge. I guess they've been tested every which way.
Yeah, they've really just found a way to win each week. But, I mean, this is going to come down to Everett Golson, their sophomore quarterback. If he's turning corners week after week after week, as many as you can have over these next 3 weekends, they might be okay. I mean, they might not really have much of an issue, certainly not going into USC in terms of facing a loss these next couple weeks. How he plays is basically going to dictate whether the Irish can come out of this undefeated. And their defense should be good enough. I wonder a little bit if they can replicate that bend but don't break plan that they basically executed perfection against Oklahoma. Can they do that again against USC? But it's Golson. It's Everett Golson. Can he get him in the right plays? Can he make the right decisions? Can he make the big plays at the big times? And that's going to dictate whether they come out of this 12-0.
Paul, LSU came close, but how would you beat Bama if it is going to finish as a win for their opponent?
I think they have to beat themselves, and they came pretty close. Keeping A.J. McCarron healthy is the issue. He was very hurt against LSU, and Alabama has not done a very good job of keeping him upright during games.
All right, we wait to see. We're going to miss having these conversations in 2014. We'll have 4, as Brian Kelly said, we'll just play it on down. But in the meantime, Paul Feinbaum, Joshua Kinder, Adam Jude, Brian Haviland. Guys, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.